If you were a kid in the 1980s, you probably remember that Saturday mornings were basically a battleground of toy commercials disguised as cartoons.
Oh, absolutely.
We all know the big ones, right? He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe. But today we're doing a deep dive into a show that was supposed to be the next big thing, but, well, it ended up as more of a footnote. We're talking about Filmation Studios' BraveStarr.
And this is such a fascinating story. We've gone through the production notes, a lot of articles, and some historical analysis. And what you find is that BraveStarr isn't just a forgotten cartoon. It's like a critical historical document.
How so?
Well, it launched right at the very end of that 80s animation gold rush. And for Filmation, the studio behind He-Man,
Mm-hmm.
this wasn't just another show. It was supposed to be their lifeboat.
Right. So our mission today is to really unpack why this ambitious space western, which tried to do some genuinely groundbreaking things with diversity and genre bending, why it just stumbled so badly.
It really did.
We want to get to the bottom of the catastrophic commercial failure, the cultural missteps, and just the flawed execution that kind of doomed it from the start. This is a really complex cautionary tale.
And I think to get why it failed, you first have to understand just how big the vision was. I mean,
Yeah.
the sources all describe BraveStarr as this ultimate genre mashup.
This space western.
Exactly. You had all the classic Western stuff, a marshal, a saloon, outlaws on a desert planet called New Texas, but it was all blended with, this futuristic sci-fi.
Talking horses with cannons.
Right. Talking technologically advanced horses, laser guns, deep space mining operations. Is a really bold concept.
And the hero himself, Marshal BraveStarr, was explicitly a Native American lead. I mean, that was incredibly rare for kids' TV in the 1980s. He wasn't just some muscle-bound guy. He was written to be complex, dealing with law and order while having these unique, almost shamanistic powers.
And that really signaled a progressive intent from Filmation. They were actively trying to diversify the hero landscape, which had been, completely dominated by guys like the very white He-Man.
A way to evolve the formula.
Yeah, exactly. On paper, this was a massive step forward for representation in cartoons.
But as the sources make very, very clear, good intentions are only half the story. That daring vision was almost immediately undermined by some pretty glaring problems in the execution, starting with the show's tone.
Oh, the tonal whiplash.
Yeah, when you go back and watch the episodes, that's the #1 critique you see everywhere. Tonal whiplash. It was just jarring.
And it was sort of a conflict baked into the whole model of that era. They were trying to serve two masters. You had the kids who wanted cool space western action, which the show had. The animation was actually pretty sophisticated for its time.
But then you had the parental groups and the network standards people demanding these heavy moral lessons.
Right, so the sources describe how the show would just swing violently. 1 minute, BraveStarr is in this gritty laser fight with some grotesque, really scary outlaw.
And the next minute, the action just stops.
It stops cold. And you get one of those lesson of the day segments. And they were so often just tacked on, with almost no connection to the actual plot.
So instead of weaving the moral into the story, they just pause the show for a lecture.
A lecture, sometimes a rhyming one, it just killed the momentum. A character would turn to the camera and deliver this really forced lesson about, not stealing or whatever.
That kind of shift from high-stakes action to a PSA must have been really confusing for a kid watching. It just fractures the whole experience.
It does. And you mentioned the villains. Tex Hex was the main bad guy, and he was genuinely menacing. Some sources call him a figure of surreal menace.
He looked cool, a mutated, purple-skinned ghost cowboy.
Yeah. He felt legitimately dangerous. But then you have this sophisticated, kind of scary villain, and you contrast that with the need to sanitize everything for the moral of the day.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It felt like two different shows fighting for control.
Okay, so that's a huge narrative problem. But in the 80s, the real make-or-break factor was always the commercial side. The whole point of the show was to sell toys.
Right.
And that brings us to what the sources call the great operational weakness of BraveStarr, the toy line disconnect.
This is where you can really see the shadow of He-Man's success hanging over everything. He-Man worked because the toys in the cartoon were in perfect sync. The simple action figures matched what you saw on screen.
Filmation and Mattel, who made the BraveStarr toys, just couldn't replicate that magic.
Not at all. They failed to get that alignment right.
What went wrong specifically? Was it just that the toys weren't good?
It was a few things, but yeah, it was fundamentally a design problem.
Hmm.
The Mattel toys didn't fully capture what Filmation was putting on screen.
Huh.
For example, the show had all these elaborate, cool-looking, futuristic vehicles, but the toy line focused more on just, static figures.
So the way kids would want to play, recreating the big action scenes, they couldn't really do that with the toys that were on the shelf.
Precisely. The sources also point out that the main BraveStarr figure itself was a problem. It had these complex mechanisms to mimic his powers, but they were flimsy and didn't really work that well. So if the toy doesn't look or feel like the hero you love on TV, the whole commercial ecosystem just collapses. And Filmation's entire business model depended on that synergy. When it didn't happen, it was devastating.
So we have the messy tone and the failed toy line. But we have to go back to Marshall BraveStarr himself, because the show's biggest ambition, its cultural representation, also became one of its biggest problems.
This is such a crucial point. As you said, the idea of a Native American lead in 1986 was genuinely progressive. But when you look back at it now, the execution relied so heavily on cultural shortcuts, on stereotypes.
The difference between wanting to do the right thing and actually understanding how to do it, what were the specific issues the scripts ran into?
It really centers on his powers. BraveStarr didn't use gadgets. He would call on the spirits of 4 animals to get his abilities. Eyes of the hawk, ears of the wolf, strength of the bear, and speed of the puma.
That sounds like a cool visual way to power up for a cartoon, but I can already see the problem.
Right. The problem is that it, and I'm quoting a source here, it flattened indigenous identity into mysticism.
The magical native trope.
Exactly. Instead of a character with a real cultural background and a human story, he just became this vessel for generic spiritual animal powers. It was a convenient plot device, not a genuine exploration of culture.
So an attempt to diversify the hero landscape ended up just reinforcing a different kind of stereotype.
That's the modern reassessment of it, yes. They were trying to be responsible, but their lens was just so limited by the cultural understanding of the time. It meant the character, for all his prominence, never really felt like a person. He was an archetype first.
So when you add it all up, the tonal confusion, the fatal toy disconnect, the shallow cultural representation, the result was pretty predictable, a massive commercial failure.
It was brutal. The show only lasted 1 season, 65 episodes, which was the minimum for syndication, and that was it. The toy line was a complete flop, and the ratings never came close to the competition.
And if we zoom out a bit, this wasn't just one failed cartoon. For Filmation, this was everything. They had caught lightning in a bottle with He-Man. They basically invented the toy-driven cartoon model. BraveStarr was supposed to prove they could do it again.
It was their do-or-die moment. Their whole studio was built on the idea of creating another huge global merchandising machine. When BraveStarr failed, it didn't just kill a show. It shattered their entire business model.
Wow. So instead of revitalizing the company, BraveStarr's failure actually accelerated its decline. It ended up being the studio's last big original project, a cautionary tale about overreach.
A total cautionary tale. They tried to be too complex with the genre, too heavy-handed with the morals, and too ambitious with the merchandise, and they stumbled on the basics.
And it really shows a studio that was trying to keep up with an industry that they had created, but that had sort of moved past them.
That's a great way to put it. They were still using the He-Man playbook in a market that was already changing.
Revisiting BraveStarr with all this context changes how you see it. It's not just a piece of forgotten nostalgia. It really is a snapshot of 1980s commercial desperation. You can see the whole decade kind of winding down in those episodes.
For me, what stands out is that its real importance today is almost forensic. It's a document that shows you exactly where the 80s animation industry was weakest. It shows how hard it was to balance representation, morality, and the crushing pressure of merchandising.
So the simple takeaway here is, ambition isn't enough. Good intentions aren't enough. You need authentic, seamless execution, and that rock-solid link between the show and the product. BraveStarr was this daring vision that was just killed by shallow execution and internal confusion.
Which leaves a final thought for you, our listener, to sort of mull over. Think about how the story of BraveStarr is a mirror for challenges that are still very much alive in media today.
Oh, wow.
Well, think about the modern pressure for progressive representation and the constant risk of falling back on cultural shortcuts. Think about the tension between an artist's vision and the demands of a global franchise. The story of BraveStarr really proves that chasing trends without a deep, authentic commitment, well, it carries the risk of a spectacular collapse. And that's a lesson that rings just as true today.
Welcome to my supper club. Fire in the Basement, Volume 1.